Good day everyone, my name is Nico Nathaniel Esalfanta, and in this video I'll be showing you what quadratic equations are and each classification of a quadratic equation. Let's get straight into it. In algebra, a quadratic equation is an equation that can be arranged in standard form as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where x represents an unknown and a, b, and c represent known numbers, where a does not equal to 0. The values of x that satisfy the equation are called solutions of the equation. A quadratic equation has at most two solutions. A quadratic equation has three classifications: pure, incomplete, and complete quadratic equations. A pure quadratic equation is an equation that is represented as ax squared plus c equals 0, where a and c are real numbers and a does not equal to 0. A pure quadratic equation also only has a second degree variable compared to the standard form of a quadratic equation. An example of a pure quadratic equation is 9x squared plus 10 equals 0. When we put this beside a quadratic equation in standard form, you can see one key difference. The pure quadratic equation does not have a first degree variable, as opposed to the standard form of a quadratic equation. The second classification of a quadratic equation is similar to a pure quadratic equation. An incomplete quadratic equation is a quadratic that contains both a second and first degree term, but no constant. An example of this would be 15x squared minus 7x equals 0. As we have said before, an incomplete quadratic equation has a second and first degree term, but no constant term. The third and final classification of a quadratic equation is the complete quadratic equation. It is a quadratic that contains a first and second degree term along with a constant. A good example of this would be 9x squared plus 15x minus 4 equals 0. This equation fits all the requirements of a complete quadratic equation, being that it has a second and first degree term and a constant. If you can recall, the values that satisfy the equation in the place of x is called a solution. As with any quadratic equation, these classifications also have a method that is used to find their solution. First, let's go over how we can solve a pure quadratic equation. On the screen is an example of a pure quadratic equation. We can solve this by first moving our constant to the right of the equation, which would reverse the sign that it had before. Something interesting to note is, since this equation is in the second degree, we can have at max two solutions. What this means is that once we square this equation, we get a negative and positive answer. Next, let's go about how we can solve an incomplete quadratic equation. First, we need to take the common factor of these two terms. Then, we set the values of x to 0, which would leave us with one complete solution of x equals 0, and another solution of x plus 5 equals 0. On the second equation, we need to move our constant to the other side of the equation. Once we do that, we now have the two solutions that satisfy our equation. Lastly, let's go over how we can solve a complete quadratic equation. There are many ways we can solve a complete quadratic equation, each of them having its uses. For the sake of this video, we'll be focusing on how we can solve a complete quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is as follows. The values of a, b, and c in the formula are parts that are filled with the values from our complete quadratic equation. Once we do that, we can proceed with solving the formula. First, we simplify the values inside the square root. Then from there, we can now find the two possible solutions for our equation. Let's first find the solution for the first one. We add the two numbers on the numerator, then divide them with the denominator. We should have our first solution once we are done with this step. For the second solution in our quadratic equation, we follow the same process, except we subtract instead of add, since we are looking for the second possible solution. Once we are done with that, we should end up with two solutions for our complete quadratic equation. I hope you have learned something in this video presentation of mine. Again, my name is Nico Nathaniel Esalfanta, and thanks for watching.